Hey guys, it's Julian, and today I'm going to be showing you how to make emotional lo-fi house like DJ Poolboi. As usual, you can get the video, the project file, and samples, and MIDI presets. Everything from this video is available right at the top of the description on my Bandcamp, and if you're a patron on my Patreon, check there, because it's already available. And yeah, let's dive in. So, we're at 120 BPM, a little bit slower, but I think it works to the advantage with this style, because in this style, it's not so much like that, more like, upbeat, fast kind of house. It's more like kind of chilled out and slowed down and more atmospheric. So 120 BPM still gives you like the fast house tempo. Like when people listen to this who don't listen to house normally, it's like really fast to them. But it's not going to be like, maybe like 126 like a tech house track would be, where that would be a little bit too aggressive for the style. But yeah, the first sound that we got going on here are these chords, which sound like this. So it's a pretty simple chord progression. What it is it's just C sharp major, F minor, and then D sharp major. It's honestly a pretty popular pop chord progression. Like, it's used in a lot of pop tracks. It's used in really like every genre. But this gives you like a nice bass to kind of play the melody over. It's just this nice like kind of deep chord progression like this. It's not like too complicated, but it gives you all the emotional resonance that you need. And then in terms of the melody, that's up here. So what's happening with this is usually he'll have like some chords playing and then a melody playing with usually the same synth or a really similar synth. And I think it works really well with this style. So what's happening with the melody, as you can see, it's actually pretty simple. Like it's only 5 notes total in the melody. And you can see it's just kind of slowly moving along, and then it resolves nicely. I think that's the important thing with one of these kind of melodies, is like writing it so that it'll come back to that first note really well. So like if you listen to this, you can hear. I didn't get the notes right at all, but you can hear like it just kind of smoothly goes back to that first note. So it's really well like self-contained here into this little 4-bar loop, and that's really something you want to try to work on with writing these kinds of melodies. But the sound on this one is made using operators. So this is really similar to that sound you hear in a lot of lo-fi house tracks. What it is basically just this sort of like organ type of sound where you take a little bit of FM synthesis with 2 sine waves. You can see it's mostly just this first sine wave, but then there is a bit of FM happening from the second one. You can see I've got the envelope set like that, so it kind of goes down, and then I've got this an octave up, and it's also detuned. So this is how you get this sound. It's just the FM with sine waves. Like it gives you that kind of like warbly old school sound, where it's not quite like a saw wave or a square wave, but it has a little bit more harmonic content to it than, say, just a basic sine wave on its own. And yeah, the detune's really important with this type of sound too, because you want to give it sort of like a lo-fi warble to it, and that really does that well. If I turn that off, you hear how it's a lot more straight, but then if I turn it on, then we get all that movement all of a sudden. So yeah, that's really important as well, because that's going to give it that kind of like lo-fi tape sound. After that, we have a bit of chorus and some reverb, just giving the sound some space. Then we have this drum bus, as well as these 2 EQs. So I'll talk about the drum bus first, and then we'll go into the EQs. The drum bus is what's giving this the saturation and fattening it up, but it's also adding a lot to the lo-fi sound. Not just in terms of saturation, but also you can see this damp knob here is turned down. So this drum bus is actually really good for lo-fi house because of that damp knob. What you can do is just kind of get a little bit more of like a crunchy sound. And then when you turn that down, it's like a really subtle low pass filter where it's not just going to cut off the highs, but it's just going to kind of like turn them down a bit so that it'll sound more lo-fi. I'll show you what I mean. Here's with the damp all the way up. Hear how it's very like crisp? And then with it down, it's just really good for giving it that kind of like lo-fi blur, so to speak, to the sound. that can be hard to get otherwise. And yeah, then the EQs, so what's happening with these is they're really just cutting out the low end. This sound does have quite a bit of low end, just naturally. And so the reason why I have one before and then one after the drum bus is because if you listen, when you have it going into the drum bus with all that low end, it can be, sometimes the low end can get a little bit crunchy in a little bit of a nasty way. So what I like to do is just cut it out going into the drum bus, and then it gets rid of that, and now you're just drum bussing the mid-range and the highs essentially. And you know, still some of those lower frequencies, like you don't want to just cut it too high, but it's not so harsh in the low end now. And then you just put this at the end, and that just cuts the lows one more time to make sure they're not going to get in the way of the bass or anything in the mix. So yeah, and then the last thing on here is just a compressor, side chaining it to the kick. Not a whole lot, just a little bit, just to kind of make it fit into the beat. And that's it for the chords. After that we have this analog bass, which sounds like this. So for notes, this is just following the same chord progression as the chords. This is typically how it's done in this style, where it's just like a long, held out bass note like this. Following the chords. Usually the groove in this type of track is actually coming from the percussion, not the bass line. So yeah, that's something that really separates lo-fi house, I think, from other styles of house. I feel like lo-fi house is kind of just like headphone music house, if that makes any sense. Like house that can be played very well in the club, but it also works really well like on its own. So it doesn't need to have that super like bouncy bass line. But yeah, so with the sound here, it's just an analog. What it is it's just a square wave going into a low pass filter. Here's without the low pass. It's like a big fat square wave. And then when you low pass it and turn the resonance up a bit, you get like a very nice deep sound. But the thing with this one is, you see how there are like, there's this big point here on the EQ, and then there's like 2 or 3 over here to the right. So this big point that you see here, that my cursor is on, that is called the fundamental harmonic. When you work with a sine wave, this sounds very similar to a sine wave. When you work with a sine wave, you only get the fundamental harmonic. That's why it sounds so deep. So you can hear and see, this is really close to a sine wave, but now we're getting these higher harmonics over here. That's what these points are. And these allow you to kind of hear it as well as feel it. Like, when it's just a fundamental harmonic, you kind of just feel it. That's why with a sine wave bass, it's hard to hear like on your phone and stuff. But with this, it's going to be a little bit easier to hear on phones and on cheap speakers and stuff like that, because it has some higher harmonic content. So that's why I did that. That's why I usually go for like a square wave into a low pass filter as opposed to, you know, just a sine wave for the bass. And yeah, and then we got the amp envelope set like this. After that, I just have a bit of saturation, which is beefing it up a bit, you know, making it a bit fatter. Then we have a compressor, side chaining it to the kick. This is a bit heavier than the side chain on the chords, because I wanted it to fit in with the kick. You know, you want to mix your low end to really fit together well. But yeah, and then speaking of that, the last thing on here is just this EQ8, which is cutting at 100 Hertz, just cutting out some room for the kick, because that's where the kick is punching. And then I boosted the lows really slightly. Oh yeah, that's it for the bass. After that we have the kick, which sounds like this. So this one's pretty simple, you know, it's that standard lo-fi house, just like a fat 909 kick, lots of punch to it. You know, it just punches through the mix really hard, without being like too hard. Like, it's all relative. You know, this kick, if you put this on a techno track, might be too soft, but in the context of this mix, you can hear it's the biggest, fattest, most punchy thing, so it works really well in this style. And that's something that's important to think too, like especially with the way I sort of communicate things to you guys on this channel. It's all relative to the track. So like, you can have a kick that's hitting really hard in one track, but then if you put it into another track, it would be too soft. So it's an important thing to think. Like, we're not going for the craziest, fattest techno 909 of all time, but we still want it to be pretty fat and pretty punchy in the context of this mix. So that's what I've got here. And then you can see I really just have a saturator on that. Like, it's not a whole lot to get this to work. This one's more about just getting like a nice fat 909. I think it's better to find like a really good 909 kick sample and then just have to saturate it a little bit rather than find like a tiny one that isn't any good and then have to try and do all this crazy stuff to make it work. Like, it's always better to just start with a really good sample like this. The other thing with this one is the low pass filter. If I turn this off, you can hear. Like without it. And then with it. So this kind of goes back to what I was doing with the damp on the drum bus on those chords where, you know, we're just cutting off the subtle highs. Like that real high clickiness that was in this kick. And when you do this throughout your track, that's how you get the lo-fi sound. A lot of people think like the lo-fi sound comes from just throwing like something on the master or filtering everything or whatever, or filtering like everything at once, or, you know, putting some kind of compression on the master or something. But really, how you get the lo-fi house sound, you can do it that way. It's not really going to sound that good. The way it really comes is from doing little stuff like this throughout your project where, like, you know, you're just constantly doing little things to make it lo-fi and not just like trying to do one big thing at the end. And yeah, that's it for the kick. After that, we have the percussion. So it's kind of like two groups. We have the hi-hats, which are these two hi-hats and the shaker, and then we have the claps. So the hi-hats, I'll play them on their own. You can see we got like this main one. Just got a bit of saturation on that. And then we have these two little ones just playing little percussive notes here and there. So yeah, really not too crazy. It's basically just about choosing the right types of sounds. Like this hi-hat, for example, even though it is that main hi-hat on the upbeats, again, it's all relative. We're not going to go for like the biggest, longest 909 hi-hat sample, but maybe something shorter and tighter like this can work really well. As long as it just fits in with this track. And then just mixing the other two so that they're not taking up too much space. And also just not putting in too many notes. Like you can see, each one only happens like 1 or 2 times every 2 bars. And that's all you need. You just need a little. You don't need like a whole long, like, you know, if I had maybe something like this. Yeah, that's a little bit unnecessary. Like, we can just have it kind of be a little bit more free and breathing by having these not happen too frequently. So yeah, and then the other percussion here is the clap, which sounds like this. So I've noticed that not just in DJ Poolboi's tracks, but in a lot of lo-fi house tracks, there's a little bit of reverb on the clap. And what it is you get this kind of a clap, like sort of a very fat, punchy 909 style clap or an 808 style. And then what you do is you put this sort of dark reverb on it. So it's a pretty long reverb. And then you see this high cut here. I've turned that down a bunch. That's the key, because if you don't have that, you get all those high frequencies. And again, it's not going to sound very lo-fi because you have all these bright things, especially if I turn this up. Like all that frequencies, that's not really what you want. So then you just turn on the high cut. And there you go again. It's just like I was saying with the kick. It's like you do little things every step of the way to make it sound lo-fi. And that's where the sound comes from. So yeah, and then on the group of percussion, all I have is this drum bus. It's really all you need to get like some nice, fat, lo-fi house percussion. Here's without this. So you can hear everything doesn't really have, like it doesn't really have that texture to it. It doesn't really feel like even and balanced. It's kind of just like a few nice percussion sounds. But then when you turn this on, you get everything kind of comes to a more even place volume-wise. And you get that texture over everything, where it's like kind of fattening everything up and gluing it together. And really what this does is it makes everything feel cohesive. Like, this is why I do this, is because, you know, part of this sound is having, like, everything kind of sound like it's going through the same filter. So if you put all your similar elements, like all your percussions like this, in a group, and then put them through the same drum bus where it's getting the same saturation and the same filtering from the damp knob, you know, it's going to make it a lot more cohesive and kind of feel a lot more like it's supposed to feel in the style. And yeah, so that is it for the percussion, and that is also going to be it for this video, guys. I hope you enjoyed. As always, make sure to like this video as well as subscribe, and let me know what you think of this video in the comments. Like I said in the beginning, you can get the full project file and samples and MIDI presets. Everything from this video is available right at the top of the description, and if you're a patron on my Patreon, check there because it's already available. Thank you so much, guys, and I will see you tomorrow with another video.